So on this Boles.tv live stream, we have often discussed the human condition, the fall of belief, the infatuation with disinformation. I have often recalled the 1921 quote from the great American playwright Eugene O'Neill, who said in 1921, the problem of the 20th century is the failure of science and technology to replace the death of the old God. And we are seeing that playing out in some of our political discourses and in conversations we're trying to reasonably have with unreasonable people. And what a difference half a century makes. The whole world can spin on its head in 50 years. We've seen that with the reversal of Roe v. Wade, where women, young women, all their lives have known that they owned the right to make a decision about their body, and it has now been taken away by the government, by the Supreme Court of these United States. And that loss, that 50-year loss, reversal of fortune, it makes you wonder what else has changed in those 50 years. How have we moved from one mindset into another? One perhaps of intellectualism and a soft caring to a hard, religious, punishing style of behavior and communication, where science and technology are thrown out the window and religion becomes the mainstay of the day. Maintain, perhaps all three. So in this conversation about how far we've fallen, intellectually and emotionally, as the United States of America, for the purpose of this conversation, we'll travel back 50 years into the time of Robert F. Kennedy. Now, Robert F. Kennedy was a superstar, politically speaking, and I will wager, for the purpose of this conversation, intellectually speaking as well. He was an American politician and lawyer, known as RFK, brother to JFK, father of Robert Kennedy Jr., and we will be discussing him in a moment. So RFK was very successful, and murdered by Sirhan Sirhan. But before Bobby Kennedy died, he made one of the most beautiful and impassioned speeches that I have ever had the delight and honor to listen to, watch, read, and know. And I'm going to share it with you now. And there is actual, I want to say video of this, but it wasn't video at the time, it was filmed. Bobby Kennedy was running for president in 1968 in the shadow of the assassination of his brother, John, by Lee Harvey Oswald, and he will discuss that in this speech that he is going to make. And 1968-69 were very vicious years in the livelihood and the status of our country. So on this night, April 4, 1968, in Indianapolis, Indiana, Bobby Kennedy was campaigning for president. And he was on the back of a pickup truck. It was raining. And most of the people who were there to see him happened to be black. And earlier in the day, Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. But this was 50 years ago. This was 1968. There was no internet. There was no immediacy of news. Bad news, good news traveled mainly by word of mouth. Hey, did you hear? I don't know if you're aware of this, but. And if you watch this film of Bobby Kennedy getting ready to make a speech, he says, do they know? Talking about his audience, do they know that Martin Luther King has been killed? Do they know? And he's told, no, they probably don't know. So in the flash of a moment, in the flick of an eye, Bobby Kennedy stands in the rain, in the dark, with a microphone, in the bed of a truck, and makes this absolutely beautiful, inspiring speech off the top of his head. And that tells you this is how he thinks, this is how he reacts, this is how he lives his life. Prepared speech, no thoughts or prayers. He just stands there and talks to his audience, and they gasp when he tells them the news. And he relates to them on a human level that we do not see in our current politics 50 years later. And this is not a political moment. This is Bobby Kennedy being a real human being. I'm going to read you a speech. I can't play the video because it would be a copyright infringement. Senator Robert F. Kennedy, Indianapolis, Indiana, April 4, 1968. I have bad news for you, for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and killed tonight. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice for his fellow human beings, and he died because of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation are we and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence, there is evidently that there were white people who were responsible. You can be filled with bitterness, with hatred, and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in great polarization, black people amongst black, white people amongst white, filled with hatred toward one another. We can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and to replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land, with an effort to understand with compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and distrust at the injustice of such an act against all white people, I can only say that I feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poet was Aeschylus. He wrote, "In our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion towards one another, and a feeling of justice towards those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or they be black. So I shall ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. That's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love, a prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past. We will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness. It is not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings who abide in our land. Let us dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago: to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. That is one of the most beautiful speeches you will ever read or hear, and I will put the link to that in our Discord server chat after the broadcast. So that was 1968, 50 years or so ago. A beautiful, thoughtful statement that still, unfortunately, rings harsh and true in the divide between black and white in America, and in hatred and in lawlessness that we see proving itself every day in America. And so you wonder about falling, and you wonder about what gets begat and begone in America. And sometimes you don't have to look very far to see the results of how far we've fallen. And now I point you to the life of the son of Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. He was born in 1954, so when his father was killed a few months after he gave that speech by Sirhan Sirhan, Robert Kennedy was around 14 years old, so he was not a child. He had full exposure to the life and the expectation and the intelligence of his father. And for some reason, people get lost, they fall, and sometimes they hope for a rescue. And in the comparison of the life between the father and the son, and the sins of the father are visited upon the son, as Henrik Ibsen said, you cannot disarm the fact that Robert F. Kennedy has not only stepped out of the shadow of his great father, he has not only withdrawn from the footfalls of history in the past, he is going his own way, blazing his own path as an anti-science, anti-intellectual, anti-vaxxer. Robert F. Kennedy is a pro-conspiracy theorist. I'm not sure if he's read Aeschylus. I'm not sure if he cares about the savageness of man. He oftentimes claims to care about the climate and the world, but he does seem to believe what Eugene O'Neill said in 1921, the failure of science and technology to replace the death of the old God. And as evidence of this, here is a recent article, an interview published with Bill Gates in Forbes magazine. And in this wide-ranging interview, Bill Gates talks about his work on the COVID vaccine. And Robert Kennedy's involvement in his life as a philanthropist. Bill Gates, who predicted a pandemic back in 2015 and became famous around the world for his views on COVID-19, said he still doesn't have a solution for misinformation and conspiracy theories. He's even had people approach him on the street to yell at him, accusing him of tracking people with microchips. The polarization and lack of trust is a problem, Bill Gates said. One of the best-selling books last year was a book by Robert Kennedy saying that I like to make money and kill millions of people with vaccines. It's wild that sells well. COVID-related conspiracy theories appear to be dying down with the receding pandemic. Bill Gates said, I have a group that tracks what's on the web, that's talking about things that connect to me. Overwhelmingly during the pandemic, 95% of that chatter was all the conspiracy theory stuff. Bill Gates is still worried about domestic polarization in the United States, which he sees little hope for in the short term. I admit that political polarization may bring it all to an end, and we're going to have a hung election and a civil war, Bill Gates said. I have no expertise in that. I'm not going to divert my money to that because I wouldn't know how to spend it. So, my friend, we have come full circle. We have traveled back to 1968, 50 years ago. We have seen the beauty and the reconciliation of Bobby Kennedy. 50 years later, we have seen the ill-tempered distemper of Bobby Kennedy's son, Robert Kennedy, fleeing conspiracy theories and anti-science against Bill Gates. And that is yet another example, another brick being pulled from the arch that's keeping the United States together as a union, that we are coming apart. Where thought and intelligence and science is disregarded as unimportant. And that theories and feelings and guessing are put on an even level with science and technology. But if we travel back to the time of Aeschylus, science, theory, facts, laws, important, but not the main thing. The main thing is the recognition of suffering. In our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart. In our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. May we begin to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. That was the hope of Bobby Kennedy in 1968. And it appears we have not really advanced very far economically, socially, or culturally in those last 50 years. It appears we have lost more than we have gained. We have gone backward in an attempt to refuse to move forward. And the only hope I see, the only salvation, is that somehow we turn this around. And thoughtfulness and caring and education become more important than punishing and repression. Now it's time for our next blood pressure break of the day, returning in a moment.